Okay, I'll begin. We have enough to start. And so this is the anti-bias learning session that neighborhood councils will need to be aware of, since under the city plan, neighborhood councils are involved and as part of the charter will participate in the anti-bias training. We will delve into the plan on providing anti-bias learning to is already being provided to city employees. Commissioners have taken it, and now it's going to be time for neighborhood council members to take it, board members to take it. We will talk about the history of the initiative, plans in the works now, and what has been going on thus far for city employees who have undergone the anti-bias training. Then we will talk about the plan underway for NCs, or what's going on with neighborhood councils right now. It's in the beginning stages of providing testing. This is really an important issue, and it's come up so much in this past year with the pandemic and with the racial issues that have arisen, with the demonstrations that have taken part all over the country, and it's affected California, Los Angeles in particular, and our neighborhood councils close to home very much. And it's something that we just simply have to deal with. The issue hopefully will bring enlightenment to some of the biases that we hold when we are discussing issues, and how we maybe tamp down a little bit on our negative thoughts and raise our ability to listen to all sides of an issue. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that this one workshop will bring us all to a kumbaya moment and that we will somehow solve the issue of dealing with our biases. But I think maybe if we have just a little bit of enlightenment and a little bit of discussion, we can maybe modify and think about modifying our demeanor and work toward progressing our neighborhood councils to enhance communities. If we get bogged down in biases, that's not good for what the purpose of a neighborhood council is. It's not good for our community, and it's not good for the enhancing of our community. So it becomes an important issue that we have to deal with, and in a more advantageous way. By emphasizing our biases, the betterment of the community really loses out. So we have to do something about this. So we will discuss the issues today. In this first session, we have more of a background, talk about what's going on with the city right now. And then in our second 45-minute session, a little later on, we actually will talk with a few people who have taken the test, and hopefully some more will come online that have been invited to experiment and take the anti-bias learning test. And so we will discuss the pros and cons of that issue. To begin with, though, this morning, I just wanted to mention who would be speaking. And of course, I always ask Deputy Mayor Shockley to come on and talk about this. This is the beginning of the Executive Order 27 that started this whole issue of how we were dealing with bias and discrimination and all the issues that have arisen in this past year. So she'll kind of give a little overview of what's going on. We also have, I always get this wrong, Malika Billups from the Department of Personnel, who has been overseeing the training that's gone on with city employees thus far. And then, of course, we have our own Gibson Nyambura, who is our department's diversity officer. And that's what we're doing in the morning. And then in the afternoon, I've asked 3 neighborhood council members to talk about the anti-bias testing that they took so that we can discuss it. And I also have attorney Jumana Cillian Sabah, who works with I wanted to say our keynote speaker this morning, Capri Maddox, but I don't want to get into, okay, but anyway, Jumana is the Director of Policy and Discrimination Enforcement for the Civil and Human Rights and Equity Department, which is what falls under Capri Maddox. So let's start out with Deputy Mayor Brenda Shockley, who's also the Chief Diversity Officer.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much, Joy. Thank you for always including me when the conference of neighborhood councils comes together. I said, I think that probably as just a little backdrop to this, the importance of considering it when you're all coming together is very critical, because recent studies have shown that Los Angeles's housing is more segregated today than it was 50 years ago. So that while you'll have neighborhood councils that have some great diversity, you also have some that really are kind of removed from the issues that we're talking about today. And I think that at least make the effort to be aware and to understand the compelling issues of the day, regardless of whether they are directly involved with them or not. Because any one of us who's looked at the news or follows the news or follows what's going on, it is almost unanimous that this United States of America is in its greatest constitutional crises since the Civil War. This is not something you cannot have an opinion about. This has to do with our very legitimacy as a country and our legitimacy as a democracy. That is where we've arrived some 2 years later, almost 2 years, 16 months, I understand, since the killing of George Floyd and the demonstrations that took place all over the country and dramatically here in Los Angeles. And it was after those demonstrations and really actually on what I refer to as an unofficial African-American holiday, June 19th, Juneteenth of 2020, that Mayor Garcetti found himself in the position of saying he knew he wanted to exercise leadership on this point, and he issued Executive Directive 27, which is racial equity in city government. Now, I'd like to just take a little bit of a detour only to say that what the mayor did in 2020, it didn't start all of what is going on around the issue of addressing inherent bias, discrimination, and the like here in the city of Los Angeles, that the Department of Personnel had already begun because, you know, the morale, the efficiency, the regard of the city is tied up in exactly how people are treated. People are internally and people externally. And I deferred to my colleague, Malika Billups, who had been working on this and has been, and as a labor lawyer, understands from an employer's perspective, the liability and the potential exposure, coupled with what is absolutely good practice in terms of how we treat one another in the workplace. So while it's complementary, in many ways it's parallel, and there's that mutuality, because we are trying to create an environment where everyone is valued, everyone is treated fairly, and in the end, the city will be a better place, and its ability to serve its constituents and its residents will be a better place. Back to ED 27. ED 27, and you mentioned, and it'll come up probably in the course of the day, because another leg of this stool, this three-legged stool around bias, discrimination, inclusion, diversity, where Capri Maddox, as the general manager of the Civil and Human Rights and Equity Department, deals with things that are external to the city, where the personnel department and the inherent bias training is internal to the city. And ED 27 is both, because it is addressing the issues around not just employment, recruitment for city employees, but for how are services provided to neighborhoods, and whether those services are provided in a fair and equitable and just manner, as well as something that I focus on because it hasn't been focused on as much as I believe it should, and that is the contracting. The city of Los Angeles spends over $4 billion a year on services and contracts, and it's important. Every business has the right and the opportunity to avail themselves of doing business with the city of Los Angeles. Out of this, we've also ended up working with a team at USC because we need a baseline. And we have a procurement officer in the city of Los Angeles, a chief procurement officer. However, they've never, because of Prop 209, they've never really gathered information around the businesses of color, African-American businesses. They've never really gathered it other than for federal purposes in a way to see how has the city made any progress? What are we doing to include all of the businesses in the city in the largesse that comes with city contracting? So those are big pieces. In terms of the city racial equity piece, the mayor was he's very pointed that we will have every department, the 33 to 36, depending on how you like to count it, departments will have a racial equity officer, that there will be a racial equity plan for every department, that there will be a racial equity task force, that there will be a baseline study. But something I think is of critical importance and major change is that the general manager's review, performance review, will also be where there is an assessment of the progress being made on racial equity in the department. And that leadership starts at the top and the accountability ends at the top. I say all that, and I can proudly say that a year later, within a year, all of those directives, except for the study, which is going to take a bit longer, every department does have a racial equity officer, including Dunn. Every department does have a plan. There is a task force. All of those things happen. However, we are all very aware that we're coming to the end of this current administration, and that an executive directive by a mayor is in many ways as good as long as that mayor is in office, because that directive can be replaced by another directive. So I found it most compelling that we find a way, because this is not work, it hasn't been done in 400 years, it's certainly not going to be done in 1 year. And we were very fortunate to have the partnership between the mayor, Garcetti, and Councilmember Ridley Thomas, so that Councilmember Ridley Thomas, in his anti-racism ordinance that he presented 1 year later on June 19th of 2021 incorporates in total the requirements of ED 27 and now makes it part of the values of the city of Los Angeles. It is not going to be subject to the whim of whatever next mayor there would be, as that, as well as the governance. And so that this expectations, the Garcetti administration, and will be part of Mayor Garcetti's legacy. That is major in the context of where we are today, because the conversation in so many ways has retreated to like just short of why are you here? And there's really very polarized feelings and resistance. And I find it kind of interesting that in many ways, this seems to track the resistance to vaccine and willing people are to just engage in exploring the importance of it all. From the perspective of neighborhood councils, Dunn has really stepped up and always been a great part, and Gibson's been there. But also it has to filter throughout your 90 plus or 90 various councils. And there needs to be the conversation. I've been on various Zooms. Sometimes they're called, quote, messy conversations. Sometimes they're called sensitive conversations. Sometimes they're called, troublesome. Bottom line, we've got to learn how to talk about race, to acknowledge where we are, and to deal with how it is as critical for everyone, not just to those who are of color or those who are being targeted, that the quality of life in this city, the success and the growth and the thriving of this city is directly tied to how the least of us are being treated. It is directly tied to those who do not have the voice that some of us have, that how they are treated, how the city recruits, how the city promotes, and what will be the culture of the city of Los Angeles and of all those other limbs of the city, including neighborhood councils. What are we going to be saying? Are we going to be those who acknowledge change, that embrace the importance of racial justice and social justice to everyone in every neighborhood and in every council district? With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I can't emphasize too much how important it is for each of us to examine ourselves, examine our own beliefs, compare that to how we really treat others, because we make up the institutions. When we talk about institutional racism, when we talk about structural racism, these are not sort of concepts that are self-fulfilling. These are actions by people and how people are treating other people. And I think I'll segue into having taken the inherent bias test myself. You can't be reminded enough of how your behavior impacts others. And we can't be so disengaged and focused on, quote, the work. As someone said yesterday, when we had at the Chamber of Commerce, everywhere you go in this city, private sector, public sector, academia, everything, the fire department, you name it, we are all at every level facing the challenge of racial justice. And how is that justice going to be upheld? and how will it be reflected in the way that this city operates and how it impacts every individual.
Thank you, Brenda. I wanted to, oh, I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor Shockley.
Oh, please, Joy, please, Joy.
I wanted to make a point on the discussion on racism. When the issue came up last year, when this all started about Black Lives Matters, what we found out in neighborhood councils with the diversity that is all over this city is that a lot of different biases and prejudices came up, not just about race. Our LGBTQ community was impacted. Other religions and seniors started complaining about how they were treated by a different generation. It really multiplied into just a series of biases that people hold against each other. There was even, economic viability. It just became overwhelming. And I think that's why this anti-bias training is so important, to kind of tamp down on all of that. There's been a couple of questions in the chat, and I just wanted to mention that a lot of the discussion will do a participation when Malika comes on, which is going to be right away. But also this afternoon, 3 of our neighborhood council people took the implicit bias training, and we're going to talk about that. And there was a question about ideas about how to consider our implicit biases during neighborhood council meetings, and I know that's the issue, in making decisions about funding nonprofit grants or doing outreach or holding neighborhood council events. That's where a lot of biases come into effect. Dr. Thiele Thatch, who is going to be in our afternoon session, is doing her own session after ours, where you talk about how to work in a neighborhood council environment to try to bring those issues under control and to be fair in making the decisions around that. So I just wanted to mention that. I wanted to go to, I didn't know if anyone has any questions about, for Deputy Mayor Shockley. Is there anything? There's nothing in the chat. So I will go on to keep our schedule going, go on to Malika Billups, attorney Malika Billups, who is the diversity officer for the Department of Personnel for the city of Los Angeles, and has been kind of overseeing and managing and looking at the implicit bias training that city employees have already undergone or are undergoing right now. And it will relate to how it's going to apply to neighborhood councils, I believe. So I would like to introduce Malika Billups.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I'd like to share my screen. If possible, it looks like I am able to do that. Can you see this?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay,
got it.
Perfect. So I'd like to go through a background of sort of what my role is, and then we'll dig into implicit bias and implicit bias training, because it's something that I learned a lot putting together the training. I found it incredibly fascinating, but also I have to be honest, it's incredibly daunting because there's a lot to think about. It gives every individual, I think, a lot to think about. And all of the work that is related to implicit bias and then generally diversity, equity, and inclusion. The hardest part about it, I think, is that it requires a lot of introspection of ourselves. And that is something that, because we all like to think, oh, no, I'm fine. I'm not hurting anyone else. I'm not doing anything problematic to anyone else because I'm a great human being. We all generally think positively about ourselves and how we impact people. But I think that this training and these types of discussions help us reflect on the idea that maybe I don't have all the answers. Maybe I could do a little bit less talking, a little bit more listening. So I'll just go through my presentation quickly. I would love for there to be questions to answer, and we'll kind of get into it. So I am Malika Billups. I run the Office of Workplace Equity in the Department of Personnel. I am the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. And what we do, and Brenda touched on this, and I think it's really important for people to understand that this three-legged stool that she's talking about is a stool that holds up one entity, and that is the city altogether. So we are all in our different places, but we have to work together in order to keep the thing, standing up or moving forward, or however we want to describe it. So from the Office of Workplace Equity, we look internally in the city. So we are the personnel department. So we are not necessarily providing services to the constituents and the community within the city. But what we endeavor to do is support the people who do. So that is city employees, that's neighborhood council members, board members, that's volunteers, that's commissioners. All of those people have to work in a place where they are comfortable, feel supported, and that they are able to provide the services to everyone else who relies on them. So what we do is twofold. Is we're working on, and this is something that the neighborhood council is particularly connected to, developing policy. And it's very connected to the neighborhood council's code of conduct conversations that are happening. But we're developing our workplace equity policy and procedures to work on the protective mechanisms. We're making sure that, we're looking for risk management, making sure that the city isn't being sued and that we're avoiding the worst possible behavior like discrimination and harassment. But that's just one half of what we do. The other half, I think of as being very proactive, is looking into how can we make our city workforce a better place. And in fact, ideally, the best possible place to work where everyone feels that they can come to work. They can come to whatever duties and services they provide as people affiliated with the city, and that they can bring their best selves to work. So our goal is to build an equitable workplace by fostering a culture of inclusion and belonging, because we already have a diverse workforce. We already have, that is the beauty of neighborhood councils, is the diversity. You represent the various and sundry communities of the city of Los Angeles. And there is an inherent tension, I think, when you have diversity, because you have different perspectives, you have different ideas, you have different ways of existing, you have different ways of interacting that are natural and inherent to you. But then when you have diversity, you have someone who sees the world differently, who engages with the world differently, and it creates some tension. So the way that I see it is, if you're not proactive about making that thing work, then it's probably not going to work. So, I talked a little bit about the policies, and we look at what is workplace equity. Specifically, workplace equity, from my perspective, from the personnel perspective, focuses on the things that are protected under state and federal law. But as Brenda mentioned earlier, these concepts are not limited. It's, race is, I believe, is a very huge part of how we engage with the world and how we're received by the world. But all of these things here are very impactful with respect to how we're received by the world, the way that people treat us and think about us and form opinions about us before we're even able to speak or connect or make a relationship with people. So, like she talked about, age, religion, all of these things are really important, but there's a lot of things that are not protected that are also part of people's basis of forming opinions about someone else. And I think that either Brenda or Joy mentioned earlier, socioeconomic status. It's not a protected category under the law, but it is something that people make decisions and determinations about who someone is, what their life is about, and you make that split-second decision quite often. I would say body size, whether someone's tall or short, wide or thin, all of those things go into our preconceived notions of how we do and perhaps should interact with people. Often we are conscious about it, and so we check it. But sometimes, and that's part of what we'll get into the implicit bias concepts, some of it is not conscious, and you don't necessarily even realize that you may have some of those biases. And that is why we end up going into training. So in ED 27, the mayor, I thought, was very insightful in mandating that the city create a citywide implicit bias training. And I think that is the foundation, or at least part of a strong foundation of building a citywide inclusion and anti-bias plan. So I talked a little bit earlier about the benefits, well, not necessarily about the benefits of diversity, but the realities about diversity. I think that any sort of diverse environment provides not just the ability for productivity, but you have the ability for different ways of thinking, different ways of engaging. And there's just, I think, a broader opportunity for learning and growth when you are in a diverse experience. I think we've all been in a situation where we've met someone who has a different background than what we're familiar with. And we talk to them and we say, I never knew that. I never would have known that had I not spoken to someone like you. I think we've all probably benefited from something like that. And I think that that is what a community and a workforce should strive for, because of that inherent expansion of worldview when you have diversity. But as I mentioned earlier, the tricky part with diversity is that if you are not intentional about creating inclusion, then you probably don't have an inclusive environment, and you need an inclusive environment if you have diversity. If people think differently, engage differently, respond to the world differently, then you have to work to bring them together. That takes work. It doesn't always just happen naturally. And so I think the implicit bias training that we've started to roll out is part of building inclusion, because it starts with a foundational level of self-awareness. So the training, I know many of you haven't taken it, but once you do take it, I think that you'll recognize it's not just telling you, these are some terms to remember. These are some, categories to learn. This is a phrase that you should say when you encounter someone who is different from you. It is a lot of sitting down and thinking, I fell right into that trap that I told myself I wouldn't fall right into when I took this little quiz or when I thought through these types of things. It is the opportunity to create a little bit of introspection. And the way we do it is I am not a psychologist. And so we are leaving it to the psychologists in the training to explain implicit bias, explain unconscious bias, and explain the psychology of how our brains function. But what I can do is talk to you all a little bit about why it's important.
You have about 2 minutes to do this.
Okay. So it's the reason why it's important. So this is what the training is going to go through. And again, I'm just going big picture because you are all going to be taking the training. So these are some of the questions that the training does bring us through. Like, what does it mean? What does it look like? How do our biases form? Why does it matter? And one of the interesting things that we provide the opportunity through the training is to take the Harvard Implicit Association test, which you may have heard about. It's a controversial test, but it is by far the most consistently and widely used test for assessing potential bias at the moment. Now, I don't want people to take the test and think, oh my goodness, I'm a horrible person because I didn't answer questions, or I found that I have a certain bias against, certain groups of people. That is not a judgment on you as a human being. It is really an opportunity for you to look within yourself, to think about what the influences are, the things that you see in the world, things that you see in community, and the things that you expose yourself to. Because I think one of the primary ways to counteract any implicit biases that you may have is by providing yourself, creating a counter narrative when you are aware that you may have a negative implicit bias. There are a lot of different tests that you can take in the Harvard Association's test. It's race, ability, religion. There are different types of things that you can look at. I think they've probably got like 20 different tests. And I would encourage you to take as many as you possibly can in order to start thinking about, what might I have that I don't even realize I have? And how might I be able to counteract that so that I don't inadvertently negatively impact someone else? So that is the end of this presentation, but I do want to answer one of the questions that I saw in the chat, which is, how has this been received? Do we have time for that?
Let me go to Gibson first.
Okay,
We might go over a little bit, but Gibson's not going to be too long, I know, because he's.
I think in an effort, because I feel Malika is is definitely the Kobe of our group right now, carrying this team. I want to thank her for this presentation, and I would just want to do a quick introduction. My name is Gibson Yambura. I am the Racial Equity Officer. One thing I definitely want to, I'm going to provide my contact information on the chat as well, is because there's been one or two observing the chat. Just want to make sure that the concerns that are being highlighted definitely require follow-up. And so if folks want to give us a call in regards to several instances of implicit bias, how staff members how interactions have happened during issues of anti-Semitism and homophobia during NC meetings, I think is something that we definitely want to be able to bring to the forefront. And we want to make sure that we're showing support, and we do not condone any type of racism or discrimination within the neighborhood council system. And we want to make sure we're doing the due diligence and we're being proactive in these situations. And that's why we want to thank our collaborators and just the leadership of Malaika, Ms. Brenda Shockley, Commissioner Joy Atkins, Joanna, and also under the leadership of Raquel, as we continue to just help continue to take the action of addressing issues of equity. And I just wanted to definitely just put it back so we can continue with the session. And I'll give my contact information in the chat. If
I just wanted to mention, because I mean, folks you got a title, Gibson, you're called Diversity Officer. Yes. For the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. So some of the issues that I see in the chat where some issues have come up would be something that should be referred to you. Not that you can solve the issue of anti-bias, but it's something that should be discussed and should be made, you should be made aware of. And so I thank the issues that have come up in the chat. And I realize that it's ongoing, and we're not going to solve. We're just not going to solve this problem overnight, and it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of. It's going to take work and the good actions of neighborhood council people to participate in the anti-bias training and to really make a difference in their communities and in their neighborhood councils on what's going on. So I just wanted to make that point. The presentations were a little long, so we didn't have a lot of time. We don't have any time for a Q&A, but we will have a lot of time for Q&A in the next session. We'll spend more time talking to the neighborhood council members about what they feel about implicit bias training. The first session was really an overview about what was going on, why it's going on, and will continue to go on. So just know that it's something that is going to be done. And there had been some question from some NCs about doing implicit bias training. I think, Malaika, you were saying that some people think it's a waste of time. Some folks are very happy with it, and everybody is not going to be pleased with facing their anti-bias feelings, their bias feelings. So it's a discussion that we'll do in the second part of this workshop. Okay, so we have a few minutes. The next part is in about 10 minutes, I believe.
Yeah.
In about 10 minutes. So we will cover that. So yeah, so at 1:35. Yeah, that's in about 5 minutes. So a little 5-minute break, go get something to drink and come back on, and we will discuss the testing.
In addition to that, Commissioner, just wanted to add on as in closing, I just want to mention that in the chat, we've put a link that gives, we're asking everybody to complete the survey that I've already put a link for, and just if they would like more information about different sessions throughout today. And I've definitely put it in the chat. And also my contact information is on the chat, so I'm definitely accessible. I think there's the instances that have been indicated in the chat is something I would like to do a follow-up on.
Right, absolutely.
Right, and also, and one thing about the survey is the workshop surveys that we're asking is they're going to be at the end of this closing session, they'll be identifying 10 people, 10 winners of this year's Congress of Neighborhood. So we're asking, folks will be winning some swag bags. And so we're just asking everybody to fill out the surveys as much as possible, provide us input, and just help us participate as we participate this afternoon. I think it will be definitely helpful.
All right, thank you. All right, so we have a break for a few minutes and then we come back on. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Shockley, for participating. You're the only one that doesn't have to come back. So thanks a lot for giving us that overview that we needed just to give us a little base of what we're doing. So I thank you very much. All right, so we'll leave this meeting and then just come back on in a few minutes, in about 5 minutes, actually. Okay. All right, so we are starting the second session. We're going to talk a little bit more about the bias training explicitly, because 3 of our neighborhood council folks came on online to talk about it. And if there's anyone else that's listening that has participated, please feel to chime in when we get to the discussion part. But I think Gibson wanted to make a few remarks to start out with, and he is, of course, our department's diversity officer.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just want to take a second for all our panelists and some of the attendees as well. Again, wanted to just do a quick introduction. So my name is Gibson Yumbura. I am going to be here to the panelist. My colleague, Erica Cruz, is also going to be with us here. She and her will be serving as a production assistant for today's session. So if anybody is attending and would like to send a message in the chat, and if they have any questions or need support, please let us know. One thing is we're inviting participants to be cordial and respect all panelists and participants, and to be open to differences of opinion. We invite all participants to adhere to the Neighborhood Council Code of Conduct. The panelists and hosts reserve the right to remove any participants violating this Code of Conduct. At this time, Commissioner, we want to turn it over to you.
And I wanted to make a point that if any of the people listening in would like to make a comment in person rather than just in chat, just raise your hand, and so that we can hear you with any comments that you may have. I just wanted to make that point, that we do have the raise hand component to this workshop. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, well, first I want to introduce Germana Cillian Sabah. I hope I have that right. As long as it's close enough, who is a director of policy and discrimination enforcement with the Civil, Human Rights and Equity Department, which is the department that Capri Maddox is heads up, and that you heard this morning at our opening session. So Germana is here to talk about to further talk about diversity.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all. Really great to be with all the panelists. And Malika, I know we've worked together very closely. Raquel, I know we had Gibson, the team had done. Really grateful to be here with everybody. Just a little bit of background. I have been with the city for 16 years. I started my career with the city working with neighborhood councils. So some of the very early formation of the concept and the constructs of neighborhood councils, even elections, I monitored elections. At some point I served as an FDM on some of those elections. So I'm intimately familiar with neighborhood councils, but also over the years, I have had the pleasure of not only working with different neighborhood councils, but really to witness how the system of neighborhood council has not only grown and expanded, but it really is a model for grassroots engagement and civic participation. And while we still have a lot of work to do, and I know part of that work is how we continue to build and expand inclusion and diversity in everything that we do at the city level. And so I do have an intimate familiarity, a relationship with Dunn and neighborhood councils. And so it feels like being back at home again. I have worked, as I mentioned, for about 16 years. Much of my work was focused on intergroup relations under the Human Relations Commission for the City of LA. And I've really worked tremendously in not only mitigating conflict and peace building, but also bringing communities together in building bridges between communities, but quite frankly, also building relations between community and government. And sometimes there's a lot of tension there, and sometimes we don't do a very good job at it. And I hope that this is something that we will continue to grow and foster. I now currently serve as the Director of Policy and Discrimination Enforcement for the newly established LA Civil Rights for short, but we are Civil Human Rights and Equity Department. We are the newest department. We were established in December 2020. Those of you that heard Deputy Mayor Shockley speak a little bit earlier, this is part of a comprehensive approach at the city leadership level. But this is really something that has been years in the making. We are under the leadership of Capri Maddox. She is our general manager appointed by Mayor Garcetti to lead this department. But the department itself is the product of advocacy. This was something that really grew out of grassroots movement and grew out of grassroots advocacy, particularly with the Black Workers Center. For years have advocated for the creation of the Civil Rights Commission, but also for the establishment of the department. So we are in so many ways the fruit of that labor. But we as a department are also focused on reducing hate and injustice through community engagement, equity initiatives, and discrimination enforcement. With the discrimination enforcement, which is the division that I am currently overseeing and managing, we have the authority under the city established ordinance to enforce the human rights ordinance for the city of LA. And what that really means is that we have the scope of our ability to take discrimination complaints in the private sector, and that is in commerce, housing, education, and employment. Our operation for the discrimination enforcement is still under development. We do anticipate for this to be launched in 2022, early 2022, so that we are able to take discrimination complaints. And again, our scope is those of you who maybe were on the earlier session, Deputy Mayor Shockley had sort of described the work that for instance, she is a chief equity officer, and the work that Malika is doing with the personnel department as internal, whereas our department is more external. And what that really means is our ability to take discrimination complaint is in the private sector only, which means we can't take discrimination complaint against other government agency or other city entity. But within the broader scope of the department, we also have purview over equity and empowerment. And with that, much of the equity initiatives under the city of LA are within the umbrella of our department. So for example, we have Renew, which is a program that works with private businesses and private companies who have signed on voluntarily to implement an equity matrix. Also under the work of equity and equity initiatives, which my colleague David Price leads for our department. Some of you may have heard David. I think he was also a speaker on another session as well. But also the Reparation Committee, which is a blue ribbon commission that Mayor Garcetti just recently launched. That will also be under the auspices of our department as well, along with peace centers that will also be rolling out. And this was all part of Mayor Garcetti's justice budget that he recently rolled out. Also within the auspices of our department are other commissions. So we have the Human Relations Commission. Some of you may be familiar with the Human Relations Commission, but the Human Relations Commission was established in 1968 to address intergroup relations for the city, and they were established shortly after the Watts civil unrest. We also have the Commission on the Status of Women that focuses on equity and gender equity and women's issues. And of course, the newly created Commission on Civil Rights is also under our department. But a big part of what our department does is also focused on prevention and focused on engagement, education. We have put out a number of webinars. Several of those webinars were focused on hate and hate prevention. But one of the biggest initiative that I would love to share with you is our LA for All campaign. Our LA for All campaign was launched in May. And under the LA for All campaign, it's a citywide campaign that was created to promote our core values as a city and our core values of pluralism. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you could all see and let me know if you are able to see my screen. Are you all able to see my screen? Great, perfect. So just a little bit about the LA for All campaign. As I had mentioned, it's really, the campaign in and of itself is a way for us to galvanize our communities and galvanize additional movements at the grassroots level. The LA for All campaign runs in we have 5 different slogans, but we also run the campaign in 15 different languages. We've recently added Hebrew as well. So as you go around the city, hopefully you have seen this. It's been all over the city on metro buses, billboards. But part of the campaign also incorporates arts, and that is the art of belonging. When this campaign launched in May, it launched during AAPI month. And as we've all witnessed an increase in hate crimes, specifically against AAPI communities, but we are also continuing to see a trend in increased hate crimes against other communities, communities of color, certainly African-American communities, immigrant populations, religious groups. We unfortunately have been witnessing an uptick of hate crime against Jewish communities, but also against Muslim communities and other Jewish groups as well, and other religious groups. LGBTQ communities have also been subjected to hate, and not only hate incidents, but hate crimes. And we're continuing to see those trends go up, unfortunately. So part of what we are doing with this campaign is to incorporate the art and art of belonging as a way to expand this message through arts. The other thing that we are doing through this campaign, in addition to promoting our core value as a city of inclusion, a city of pluralism, we also want to encourage reporting. One thing we know for sure is when we look at our data on hate crimes and when we look at what is reported, particularly through LAPD, we know that those numbers aren't reflective of what is actually happening, what we know anecdotally, but also what we are seeing and hearing being reported from other community organizations and community groups. So one thing we are doing at the city level is we want to expand access for reporting, and that is expanding reporting through our 311. Most of you, all of you should know our 311 system. And one thing we have done is we have also, working with our ITA and 311 partners, we have created an additional point of access for reporting, particularly as we know that several communities, particularly immigrant communities, have a fear of reporting to law enforcement. So 311 is a way for those who are being subjected to hate that they can report. They could also report through 211, which is a nonprofit organization. And at 211, not only hate reporting, but 211 can also provide additional support through the LA versus Hate campaign, which is ran through the County Human Relations Commission.
2 minutes, Jemana.
This is the end of my presentation, so I appreciate your time, but I wanted to leave you with some of the images of our LA for All. And as you see it going around the city, and as you see it on buses, and as you see it everywhere in the city, it really is a reminder that this is not a slogan. This is not just something that looks nice and pretty around our city, but it's a call to action. And this is our call to action to you all. And so I look forward to engaging the conversation and answering any questions you have.
These color posters ought to be at every neighborhood council meeting. just put it up on a board. It might be a good reminder.
Happy to provide. We have a lot of those posters, and there's also the website link. I'll drop it in the chat as well. You could actually download that and you could put it in your background. You could put it in your signature lines on your emails, but definitely would love for you to spread that word around. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll get to the serious part of, well, everything's been serious, but we'll get to the actual anti-bias experience that hopefully there's some others that may have joined the workshop, but I have 3 folks that I volunteered to explain their experience on taking the anti-bias testing or learning. One is Dr. Thiele Thatch, who's with the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council, Kay Hartman, who's with the Palms Neighborhood Council, and Thyris Mason, who is with Empowerment Congress North. And so we want to talk a little bit about the experience, the good and the bad, or did you feel that you gained some knowledge, or can you see something else that needed to be done, or another experience that you wanted to share that you thought should be included in the anti-bias training? And I didn't give an order of who should go first, but Kay came on early this morning for the first part. So I think she should have the privilege of going first on the anti-bias experience.
Yeah, so I have to say that I found it shocking because when I took the test and what it told me about myself is not how I view myself. So I had to really like step back and think, you know, is that test crummy, or do I have some work that I need to do? So I mean, to me, that was just like a very, very, very interesting. You know, everything in it was interesting, but I thought the test results was like the most striking because it told me something about myself that I would not have otherwise known.
I want to add, because I could add myself to it, because since I did take the anti-bias test also, that I think I always knew, so I wasn't surprised that I do hold biases. But as I've gotten older, I think I've learned to tamp down on them a little bit in discussing issues with other people. So I think I still got a positive feeling from, even though I recognized that I had certain biases, and I can talk about my biases to friends, but when it comes to bonk meetings, or when it comes to talking with neighborhood councils, and if I feel that there's something coming forth, I think I have, and they ask you in the test, how would you solve how would you solve this issue? And you have to learn to say, okay, I'm going to step back, or I'm going to listen a little better. And I think that I do that. I do rant and rave to friends about some bias that I might have, but I don't do it in meetings when I think we need to accomplish something. So that's just my opinion on me taking the test. Thiele, what did you feel?
Sure. So first I have to say thank you so much to everyone who's participated so far, to all of the panelists, to especially just for the sake of time, thank you, Commissioner Joy Atkinson, for being an example to me and a mentor. And I am a Los Angeles African-American woman Public Policy Institute graduate. I'm an alum. Commissioner Atkinson is a part of that Law Pi program. And I say this, trust me, I have a purpose of saying this. Because of her is why I'm on the neighborhood council. And I am the only Black woman on the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council, period, but also in an executive board role. I wasn't the first, I hope not to be the last, but I am the first to be involved at this level. And if it wasn't for the Law Pi program that Joy is a part of, that I would not have even known about the neighborhood council. Even though I live in Van Nuys, I was not aware that there was a neighborhood council. And so in the chat, there was a question around how can I get more people to be more diverse people on the neighborhood council, is really opening up the applicant pool, reaching out to Commissioner Atkinson and the people on this panel to get some ideas of how you can get outside of your own comfort zone to invite more people in, like myself. So I just wanted to say thank you, Commissioner Atkinson. Again, I am the only Black woman on the council for the past 2 years. And my first item on the agenda was to create a human services committee, which is the very first in Van Nuys in our neighborhood, and focused on the homeless. And one of the things that I experienced during that process was a lot of biases around marginalized communities and around the homeless, right? So that was a lot of the conversations that come up. So when looking at the training that I took, I was especially pleased because my day job outside of the neighborhood council is head of diversity for a large organization called Paycheck. Some people might know about that, for 15,000 employees company-wide. And so I lead efforts there. But to see the mayor of the town, the county, the city that I live in, speaking out about equity being important to my neighborhood, to my community, honestly, that was my first experience, because the work that I do every day, you know, working in diversity, equity, and inclusion is hard. But when you don't have leadership support, it's harder. When we don't have our people in places like the mayor and, you know, and government supporting us as a Black woman, is harder. And so that was the first impression. And thank goodness that was the first impression of taking the test and taking the training. I also wanted to just mention representation matters. And I don't want to minimize that in any way. It's, you know, sometimes we say things like that, it can become a slogan. I will repeat, representation matters. Leaders speaking out about this topic matters. It allows us as community members to really show up to these meetings with more confidence, understanding that our voices are heard, that we're visible. So that's what I walked away with at just the first literally 5 minutes of the bias training, is that this was important enough for the mayor to give an opening message, for them to use an outside consultant to take time to create this training. It was very interactive. And I don't want to take up too much more time. Of course, I have a lot of thoughts. I was looking at it from the lens of a person who's been in HR for over 20 something years, but I was also looking at it from the lens of the only Black woman on the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council, which is one of the most difficult neighborhood councils in the 99 neighborhood council. I don't care what anybody says. And anyone who would like to challenge me from Van Nuys can challenge me on that. It is a very difficult council. And we need this level of support at the neighborhood council level. So I was really grateful for the training. Thank you.
Thyris, you're up.
Hello, everyone. I am Thyris Mason. As Joy mentioned, President of Empowerment Congress North Area Neighborhood Development Council. I too am a graduate of the Los Angeles African American
Now,
Women's
that is
Public
not why I
Policy
picked them.
Institute.
Well, you picked me too. I'm not a graduate.
But
If I had
when
to
Joy
pick people that
calls
would
on
say
us,
yes.
when Joy calls on us, we don't say no.
Right. That's right.
And I'm happy to be here today because I was around when there was a particular incident in one of the neighborhood councils that kind of was the spur for the spark for where we are now. And there was some conduct. It was not the most pleasant conduct. And it led to a series of conversations, a series of grievances. I was a part of the conversation and a part of helping the young lady who was aggrieved, and a council file came about, and here we have this training for neighborhood council members. So I was a part of the process. Don't find me and shoot me. I'm partially responsible for this, but I'm okay with it because it was very necessary based on the conduct that I saw, and I would not back away from that at all. I enjoyed the training. I appreciated that it was only an hour. unlike some of the trainings that we have to take to, that we have to participate in. And I also appreciated that it was immediately applicable to not only our experiences in neighborhood councils, but our everyday experiences, out shopping, at work, being a customer in a restaurant. So I appreciated that part of it. I took 2 of the tests, and I was surprised by the outcome on one of the tests. I took the one about men and women in the workplace and found out that I was more biased towards men in the workplace. And I thought that was very interesting because traditionally in the African-American family, both parents work, but I didn't grow up in a traditional family unit. It was just my mother, and she worked, and that's all that I knew. So to be biased and skewed towards men in the workplace, I was like, wait, huh? Is this right? But I guess it is. Very interesting, very, very interesting. I don't know what to make towards that because that's not the programming I thought I had growing up. The other one I took was the Arab and Muslim one, which I didn't have any biases there. Had no expectations going into that one. I don't interact with very many Muslims or very many Arabs. So I was just kind of curious about what the outcome would be. And when it came back that I really didn't have any biases there, I was like, okay, I like that one. But let's go back to this other one. Should I take this test again? How many times can I take it to get it to skew the way I want to? But I didn't. I didn't cheat. I just accepted that answer. But I do want to go back and take all of the other ones just to get a broader sense of where my biases lie. So I enjoyed it, and I'm happy to have participated in it. Thank you.
Is Gibson still here? Gibson, I have a question. Would it be workable for a neighborhood council? I guess I'm not quite sure because people need to fit it into their schedule to take the test. But it's almost like it should be in a retreat sort of atmosphere, maybe, to even talk about the issue of biases. And to cover it, I'm always for neighborhood councils doing retreats. They don't always do it, but some do. To really focus on the issue and to focus on all the issues that have come up, that are coming up today. The purpose of taking the test. How do you cover some of the problems that occur in a neighborhood council? How do you stop some of the stuff that goes on when the biases come up in a neighborhood council? It's almost like it needs to have a retreat. I mean, we can talk about taking the test, and everybody is going to have to take it, or should take it. And I'm just wondering, does anybody have an opinion about how it should be marketed to neighborhood councils? Is this the only way to do it, through our Zoom meetings? Or should there be something special going on, a special outreach to folks to talk about, to be able to talk about anti-biasness training?
Or should it be both?
That's true too. Malika, what do you think? How are, it was mandatory for city employees, right? So kind of everybody had to take it. So, and I'm assuming that, and we'll say that to neighborhood councils, but neighborhood councils do their own thing. So,
right.
How do we encourage people to delve into it, get it done?
There's a couple, I think, layers on this. So one, ED27 sort of created the first mandate. So there's actually 2 implicit bias training mandates. One came from ED27, and that was the one that the ABLE training was created in response to. There is a second city council mandate that actually asks for a broader training than what ED27 has asked for. And that's what I've been working with Jumana and Raquel Beltran to create. It's at least sort of like a part 2, something that's more expansive. And that's something that they've said that we're not going to talk about that, but that's something that will be, and I believe, and Jumana may be able to speak to that, it may be mandated. Because it's from city council, but that's not a secret. It's a council order, and I think that is very connected to the letter that Thyris mentioned, that they pushed forward, that, you know, I saw your name, you know, the signature, like, okay, well, this is going to get done. This is what it needs to look like, you know, all of those things. And that's something that I think, you know, we definitely heavily, you know, considered, you know, just as being a part of that. So there's a lot of layers when you want to roll this type of thing out. Mandating it is one part of it. But, you know, then there's going to be people who take it, and some people are going to be like, this is amazing, I feel so enlightened, all that other stuff. And other people will say, why do I have to do this? What does this have to do with anything? Because I have specific issues that have nothing to do with race. I'm not biased. I'm fine. Don't try to make me feel bad about myself. And I want to just do the work. And I get a lot of that where they're like, I just want to get to business, and this is not business. And you know, I respectfully disagree. I think this is all part of how things get done, because we're all people. And when you have people doing this work, then you have all of these things that come with our identities that impact how we do things, how we choose to engage, the decisions that we make, and all of that stuff. But you talk about having conversations. A lot of those conversations are sticky. I think somebody called them like messy conversations, you know, tricky conversations. And I think there's a lot of different approaches for that. You can sort of mandate that, or you can also ask for people to start off with those who are naturally inclined to want to engage with those conversations. And that may be an easier starting place, I think. Because when you force someone to be introspective, that's a really hard thing to do. You can't really force someone to look into themselves and to be, you know, like respectful towards someone else sort of having their own vulnerability. I think that's a difficult thing to do. And I think you do have to sort of walk that line very carefully. And so if you are participating in that, I mean, that just may be one strategy. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. Is you start off with those people who want to participate with it, and then give them a forum, because it is very, very hard to be vulnerable in a place where you know you are going to be attacked. People just won't do it. You know, so I think that's one thing that you should consider.
Yeah. Kay, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk for a second about your idea about doing this in a retreat. And I think having a retreat among people who value the discussion is one thing. But if you have a retreat among, you know, and there are people who don't value the discussion, then I'm not convinced that it's productive use of time.
Mhm.
I mean, you know, like in my NC, there was a decision being made. I was the only one who voted against it. Whilst we were discussing it, you know, I said that actually the decision was disrespectful to Muslims. And, you know, they all went ahead and said, we're voting, well, it's easier for us to do it this way. We're going to do it. And so, like, am I going to have a good discussion in a retreat with people like that?
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't wedded to the idea. It was just an idea. that I
Well,
threw
I'm
out.
just
Joy,
presenting a counter.
Commissioner Joy, I like your idea. And I think that, you know, that's part of the work that we do on the neighborhood councils, is to influence the committee members to understand the importance of diversity. Again, I don't mean to, you know, it's a reason I keep saying this, but as the only Black woman on the council, that's been a lot of the work that I do, you know, dealing with sexism as a woman, and then dealing with, you know, racism as a Black woman. And so trying to influence some of the instigators, especially at the Van Nuys Neighborhood Council, has been a lot of my work. And so, yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think it's necessary, whether they agree to it or not. Our committee, we're actually meeting next Saturday. We're having our first board retreat. I was recently, as I mentioned, elected as parliamentarian. And so I'm going to talk about Robert Rules of Order. And then I will, of course, talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as it applies to that. Like, so anytime I have an opportunity, they're going to be subjected to hearing about it, whether they like it or not, and until they understand that it's important. So that's my take on it. And I think, yes, we should continue to, the Board of Neighborhood Council should continue to provide that direction, and expect our committees to follow that, because is long overdue. So that's just my point. And then I did want to mention, because someone put in the chat, what would be some, I forget the question now, but around what would be some good ways to make sure that we support diversity, equity, and inclusion in the meetings. And so I wanted to add the point that similar to our corporate world and our corporate life, where we have to follow policy and follow rules, we could use our bylaws. We use the Robert Rules of Order. We use the rules that we do have to make sure our meetings are run in a respectful fashion. Now, of course, they have their 2 minutes of public comments. They can say whatever they want, but our committee members cannot, and they need to be held accountable for things that they say that violate our bylaws or just regular state and federal laws that they need to be held accountable to. So each time, for me, the short version is you hold them accountable each time. I've had lots of one-on-one conversations, calling them on the phone, talking when we were meeting in person, talking outside the door face to face. And you just have to consistently hold them accountable. So, and we do have we have the code of conduct in the bylaws. We have the parliamentarian rules. We have Robert Rules of Order. And so use that.
Yes. I wanted to make a note that in our chat, I've been receiving chats from one of my favorite people, Lauren Busson. And I just want to know, does she want to come on and say something in person? You know, lift that hand so we can bring you on, because you always have something to add to the conversation, especially on behalf of the LGBTQ community.
She said, can do, hand is up.
She's not putting that hand up. She says, nope. I
No,
don't
she said, can do, hand is up.
Her hand is up.
Oh, it
Yeah,
is.
Her
up?
hand
She
is
wants
up.
to,
Yeah,
she
it's up.
needs to be selected, I guess.
Yeah, the
She needs
host
to
will
be-
need to.
She's been allowed to talk.
Right, you have to move her to.
Can you
talk.
allow her to talk?
I'm unmuted now, if that helps.
Oh, there you are.
Hello, everybody. I don't know if you
Hello.
know it, but we did, I'm the vice chair of the LGBTQ Alliance of LA Neighborhood Councils, and we did our presentation at the ungodly hour of 8 o'clock on microaggressions and how to stop them. So I'm actually really thrilled that we are able to contribute to this series of very important discussions. And I believe that the town halls are one of the spaces in which these conversations need to take. The people who say they just want the business are the people who are the problem. Can we just acknowledge that? People who are usually at the top of the list, an overwhelming number of white male mansplainers, really aggressively insisting on their privilege. And Dr. Thatch, don't want to pick a fight, but I think that Sunland, Tahunga, and I will name them, and West Hills give you a solid run for the money in terms of being biased. One thing I think we can all agree on that I believe, frankly, that the Valley neighborhood councils have earned their reputation as bastions of bigotry. No, I'm serious about this.
I have to.
Who's on them, what they prioritize, who they silence. I want you all to know that on her first visit to LONC, which is another alliance, I personally requested of both of the new GM at the time to interrogate bylaws for biases. And, you know, and I'm sorry to say, I was looked at like I was from Mars. And I was told by a director at Dunn that the solution to that was political. Now, I kept my temper, but I think the evidence is clear that without intervention, this will continue. And this means that not only are people who want to serve the city on their neighborhood councils targeted and de-incentivized from participation, but it creates a hostile atmosphere for members of the community. As the Alliance always says, we're here to help you be better public servants for the gay members on your NC that you may not know about, but for sure, for the members of your community who are. And I think at the end of the day, the obligation of every single neighborhood council is to model that behavior. I don't care whether the conversation is productive. The fact that we can call out that bigotry is the key, And people behave differently when these discussions are held, if not in person, in a Zoom meeting with cameras on, right? And so with that in mind, I do have a question. I know I'm being a bit verbose, but I want to know what's going to happen in terms of compelling Dunn to examine microaggressions as justification for suspension or removal for board members. I had the unfortunate experience of being in a meeting where a member of the West Hills Neighborhood Council, who was our guest speaker at our presentation today, was bullied racially, as well as receiving homophobic comments. The person making those comments was a fellow board member, and the NEA did nothing. Nothing. And let this bigot speak for more than 5 minutes, and then allowed the board president to curtail public comment on that behavior. If we can't get action from Dunn that protects people on the board and in the community, I gotta ask what their usefulness is. I know that's provocative to say, but I have seen way too many people harmed, including a child who was a youth member who was driven to desperation by the homophobic bullying. And I think Commissioner Atkinson will remember when I brought this to Bonk. I was furious to a child.
The child spoke at the Bonk meeting.
Yeah. We told her we would be there for them when that happened to make sure that they were protected. But it isn't stopping. I am not seeing intervention from Dunn. What I am seeing is when we tried to raise an issue of censure with respect to BIPOC microaggressions that we had experienced at the Echo Park Neighborhood Council, we received a stern letter telling us how basically I considered it a hit job on our attempt to get some justice. I am happy to share that letter. That should never have happened. They weighed in for the bigots. We were having a racial crisis at the time, and against the people trying to pursue justice. Now, I'd like an answer to that and how we can hold Dunn accountable for doing this job and not just giving lip service. I'm tired of the lip service. I can't tell you how tired. And by the way, bylaws was overwhelmingly mansplainers who just wanted to argue with people, especially women. And I am so thrilled to see a panel of competent women exploring this issue and willing to pursue the difficult conversation. If we don't do that, we have learned nothing, justice is never done. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Lauren. I've heard those issues a few times about individual problems that have occurred at neighborhood councils. Again, I'm not sure how the anti-bias training will solve any of it, except for those who want to have it solved. But that is something that the department would have to look at. And I've noticed, and this might be a bias that I have, but I've noticed over the years that Dunn is kind of schizophrenic about how we deal sometimes with neighborhood councils, in that you want to step back because neighborhood councils are part of the charter and theoretically independent. But because they're part of the charter, they do have certain rules and roles of conduct that they should perform and that they should adhere to. But it becomes questionable about when NEAs can interfere or say something in a neighborhood council meeting. When I first got on a neighborhood council meeting, and I met, and some of those NEAs are gone now from the department, but they would go to meetings and try to enforce something and be cussed at and driven out of the meeting and yelled at and saying that they're incompetent and didn't know what they were talking about. So I don't know if NEAs are kind of stepping back and saying, let's try to let the neighborhood councils take care of the issue, or or whether if they are aggressive, what will happen. So we have to talk about this. This is a policy issue that I would like to see discussed with Bonk, to say, how do you enforce, if we're talking about a code of conduct, and right now we're discussing code of conduct amendments and how to enforce code of conduct. And we're getting a lot of pushback on too much authority that we're putting into the department, and that our free speech is being attacked, and it's unfair. We're putting too much power into the hands of the general manager, which we haven't put any power in anybody's hands yet because we haven't voted on anything. But they still, that's the argument. So it's interesting to have to sit back and figure out, okay, how do you do a code of conduct, which will help, if it's an enforceable code of conduct, can help manage some of these neighborhood council meetings, I hope. Everything is, you base it on hope. You're not quite sure it's going to work. You just hope it's going to work. And so there will be a code of conduct, but I've been listening to all the workshops on it, and all the issues that Lauren brought up. There's going to be opposite viewpoint of not interfering and letting people have free speech. But how could a young person go through the trauma that she did, being called names, or not even being listened to, and being
I need to interject here, Commissioner Atkinson. They were a trans child.
Oh, okay. They were, okay. I didn't realize.
Who was consistently, yeah, I know. It's something we that's one of the things we talked about. But
Okay.
I really have to interject here. I would bet you, and I don't normally bet, that the faces of those people objecting have one particular hue and one particular sex. This is not a city of white male privilege. We are a city of people of color. And when we get down to it, they're dinosaurs. That's my strong opinion, and we treat it like that because we are raising a generation of children who need to understand that this behavior is unacceptable, that they have a right to be heard, and they have a right not to face discrimination. And
Absolutely.
that can't happen with this old guard. I have strong opinions like this, but I got to say, my batting average is well above 90%.
No, you're absolutely right, and we just have to figure out the authority to do what needs to be done. I absolutely agree.
I also want to
Drake-
point out, I have personally witnessed the haranguing of GM Beltran and the sexism that she's put under. It is outrageous. And this also happens to the female NEAs. I know they've taken a job, but no employee should be subjected to that. And these are people who are elected officials. Something needs to be done. That's not free speech. That is definitely not free speech, especially for government officials.
Yeah. Thiele?
Yeah, before, I just wanted to encourage those on the committees and those who join the councils just really briefly, because I know we're at time. But one of the things I'm really proud that our committee and our community did, when I first visited the neighborhood council, I experienced every single thing Lauren is describing. And that's what made me run for neighborhood council. And I joined with like-minded people, and we changed the old guard. If you look at the neighborhood council in Van Nuys, it is more diverse. We now have a Black male president. It was very homogenous when I first joined when I first visited 2 years ago. And we literally voted in people who changed the guard, people who represent all levels of diversity, gender, sex, everything. So I just wanted to end my comments with saying, I understand we focus on the Board of Neighborhood Council. I personally don't. I personally focus on my neighbors who are like-minded, and we are going to take over Van Nuys to make sure that it looks like we want it to look. And that's, I say with no apologies. So I just want to encourage you to join with people who believe like you do, like me, Lauren, like you and I. And we control our councils, we control our neighborhoods, and that's my final comment. Thank you.
Very good. Any last comments from anyone else?
Commissioner Atkinson, this has been a really great conversation. I'm really happy that I was a part of it. But I just want to reiterate, and I think this was something I heard from everyone here, and that is, this is work that is ongoing. It's going to take, looking at bylaws. It's going to take looking at what City Council is mandating through these trainings, what the mayor and that leadership is doing. But also what I heard sort of come through by several of the speakers is that need for us to continue to have this conversation and this dialogue. And without the conversation and the dialogue, the other will always be the other, and we will never have an ability to see each other for our humanity and our ability to then elevate each other, elevate our communities, elevate our city, without our ability to see one another, talk to one another, hear one another. So I want to leave it with that. I have been a part of the review committee looking at the code of conduct, and I know GM Raquel Beltran has really done an incredible job of not only very thoughtfully working through the code of conduct, but also working to acknowledge and recognize that there is a necessity for a code of conduct, while also there is a necessity to maintain the neighborhood councils and what the neighborhood councils stand for. So without all of those things in place, we can't have forward movement. It takes all of us, it takes time, and it takes conversation and dialogue to continue to be ongoing.
And Jemima, I have one kind of question, well, not I guess a question for you, but a comment, because you were saying that your department looks at discrimination issues kind of on the outside, and that there's a way that folks can bring issues to the department on discrimination that occurs on the outside. But what Lauren was talking about, and what so many people talk about, is the discrimination that they feel within the system, within the neighborhood council system. And it seems to me that there should be a policy framework to deal with those kind of discrimination issues. There must be a policy or a program to implement that would be similar to bringing a discrimination issue to your department. And there must be a way to bring a discrimination issue, I don't know, to the city attorney or to Dunn. Most of the serious discrimination issues that come before Dunn really end up going to the personnel department, because they might imply one of the protected groups of folks, minorities and seniors and religions. So, but I just think that there's something that needs to be a joining of the same sort of policies that so that we can answer some of these issues that occur at neighborhood councils. And I just wanted to say that. I also want to, Gibson, did you have any last words that you wanted to say before we sign off and before I thank everybody?
No, Commissioner, just want to thank this amazing panel, just being a big sitter here, trying to take as much notes and learning from amazing colleagues from all the departments that we're collaborating on in this effort.
Yeah.
We just want to let everybody know that all the attendees were asking that you fill out the survey. I'll put the link in the chat again. I definitely want to make sure that everybody can continue participating as we also continue out through the day before to the closing sessions. Other than that, yeah.
I want to thank my three folks that came on here because I told them to, Dr. Thatch and Cyrus and Kay. Well, Kay volunteered. I didn't have to ask Kay. So
thank you for allowing me to participate.
So thank you very much. And of course, thank you to Jemima and Malika and for coming on, and Lauren for coming on at the last minute and giving your viewpoint. I saw your name in the chat and I said, oh, I know that Lauren's going to have something to say. So thank you for coming on, and I appreciate everybody, and we stayed on track as much as possible, and I appreciate that. And so thank you to everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference if you're going to jump into some other workshops or whatever. So thank you very much. And see you on the next go round of something.